Hey, welcome guys. Today we're going to be finishing up our German MG team from Tamiya, and we're going to be building a small vignette slash diorama for it. We'll be doing some homemade hay bales as well as my attempt at barbed wire here, and obviously painting up the figures and getting them all into place. This was a really fun kit, if you can call it a kit. The Machine Gunner Team in general gives you, multiple options for different vignettes, dioramas, things like that. And so I painted all of them up, and so at the end we'll also take a look at kind of all of what I've been able to do with, a $20 box of figures. So let's flip it over and let's paint and build this diorama up. All right, so like I said, we have built up basically all of the figures of this kit, and these are the two that we have left. They are lying down. One's feeding the ammunition, the other looks like he's adjusting the sight on the MG34, and then the MG34 is on a stand. So these figures are, again, they're unbelievable. They require such minimal cleanup to the point where you don't even really have to worry about seam lines in the figure. We do have a little bit of assembly and construction to do, but these figures really fall together. And I typically try not to sand if I don't have to, just because seam lines in a figure can really take a lot of detail off. I did sand the arms a little bit. The legs honestly don't really need it. They were able to hide, at least on these two, the seam lines kind of on the back of the legs, which is really nice. The machine gun with its mount does come in quite a few small pieces. You could easily leave this, in multiple different pieces, paint it as you go, but the MG itself will be in kind of a gunmetal color. Whether you want to paint it gunmetal, we'll do black and dry brush with silver. But the ammo box and the majority of the mount is going to be done in German gray. So I'm going to try to build it up as I like to do, build everything up and kind of paint it afterwards. I find it to just be easier than dealing with glues and things like that. Glue and paint never mixes well, especially not the Tamiya glue. And then we'll get our machine gun slotted in here. I will say the machine gun is a little bit tight for painting, but I was able to reach kind of every surface. And if you airbrushed it black first, that sort of thing, you'd have no problem at all. But this is what the figures are going to end up looking like. Doing a little dry fitting here. I did prime them in Tamiya's fine surface primer. Really good primer. I do use it on pretty much everything at this point. I didn't always. I kind of swap back and forth, prime things black, but this is just, it's so easy, it's so quick. It's a really hard drying primer, and it's really non-invasive. It self-levels, that sort of thing. So you won't cover up any details. Then I've seen, multiple people, I think most notably maybe Night Shift, I'm sure you're familiar with, paint figures in this way. And I think this is the best that it's turned out for me so far. We're making a glaze with the paint. And what I mean is it is at least 90% water. This is a water-based Vallejo paint. So obviously you need to use whatever the thinner is and do your own research on whatever paint you're going to use. But this is beyond a wash at this point. Wash might be like 80, 85%. This is really, we're going to do like 10 coats of a really thin glaze. 90% plus water and a little bit of paint pigment in there. And the goal is to just keep staining the plastic over and over with the color that you're using. Try not to let the watery paint, in this case, pool up in the recessed areas, although that is ultimately the goal you want, is to have more color in the shadowy areas and less color on some of these creases in his pants, for example. That way, with the same color, you'll get 2 to 3 different colors on the figure. And you can kind of see it taking shape now. It's really easy if you're trying this method to think it's taking too long. It does take a long time, but stick with it. You'll see the color build up happening. That's minimum 8 coats on his uniform right now. I think we do 9 or 10 total. Then we'll start working on the hands and face and some of his accessories. Normally, I like to and have at least historically done figures from the inside out. In this case, starting with maybe his belt and the bread bag and, some of those kind of inner parts of him. This time, I painted the uniform first and basically painted it up 80% of the way. So the most difficult part of this painting method is you want to do one less coat than would fully cover the plastic. And I know that, of course you want to paint it up all the way, but it looks best when you stop one coat before you think it's going to be done. Again, that way you have different colors with just using one color. It also makes the paint easier to work with, especially even painting small straps and things like this. Even a really watered down, thinned out paint, especially if it's black, some of these darker colors, it's just going to make it easier to work with. So by painting the figure in overall field drab first, like the uniform color, and saving a coat or two, we're going to be able to correct any mistakes that we make basically in the end. But if you can avoid it, try to avoid any overpainting just in general. It'll make the entire process 1,000 times easier. And even though it's going to take a long time in general, even if you did everything perfect, it will make it all quicker in the end. So then we'll get his canteen painted up here. And as you can see here, having the really, really thin paint allows you to, there's like a black strap that runs down the canteen. If you don't use thinner, it's really, really hard to get up next to that line and to keep that line. But the properties of, the water in this case will kind of suction to that raised area, but not go over them. It makes it a lot easier for painting. And if you haven't tried, played around with thinning your paints, I would highly suggest doing it and thin them more and more and more. And you might figure out that you haven't been painting with thin enough paint this entire time. So we'll get some khaki straps painted up here. These figures are definitely in more unusual positions, but you are kind of able to reach everything, which is nice. And now we'll finish up with our last coat of field gray on those figures, and they are done, at least for now. Then we'll start working on the machine gun, which we are almost solely going to do in German gray. We're just obviously following the directions here. I do have it stuck to, this is like poster tack. Just buy it at Staples or, whatever office supply stores near you. It does help. I will say, try not to push it down into the poster tack too much, because it will kind of stick to it when you're lifting it off later. But this does allow you to, keep it in a stationary kind of platform that you can hold. Kind of similar to what we're doing with the cork, the wine corks in the figures. Then we'll get the leather pads and some of the kind of accessory stuff painted on here. We will use a couple paint markers here, one for just the stock of the weapon here. Get some gunmetal painted on some of the kind of, I guess, exposed metal parts, kind of the working parts of this mount. And then finally the ammunition here. Now this is obviously a little bit difficult. We do have kind of a flat black, like a belt, really, going down the center of the ammo here. And then we have to paint the majority of it in, I know I'm using a brass marker, but Tamiya calls for a gold. Brass is, especially on something like this, I think a more accurate color. But it doesn't matter. They're going to look almost identical when they're done. So we need to get brass on both sides of the black belt. And as you can see here, these paint markers are unbelievable. I do overpaint a tiny bit there, but we're talking about painting something absolutely minuscule here. And it works. It works really well. So once we have that done, we can come back with a little copper for the actual portion that is the bullet. The brass in this case is like the shell. And we'll come in and we'll just paint really just the tips of those bullets with the copper color. Come back, fix any of the black that you see that needs to be fixed. And then we are just going to, this is the way I paint all of my kind of weapons, is flat black and then dry brushed gunmetal, on the edges and kind of the details, that sort of thing. Then it comes time to build this diorama, the base, which I know this looks kind of like a disaster, but we are able to piece it together and to the point where you would think it would be one piece. So this is from one of Ammo by Mig's cuttable mats that I've been using pretty much on all of my figures, as well as kind of my display bases for the models. It is, you're able to cut it with regular scissors. It's really nice. They are expensive, at least I think they are. So I didn't want to waste any of them here. And obviously these figures called for, especially with the MG, a bigger block of, wood than I have normally used. So I was able to basically cut this up into a bunch of different working pieces, get it glued on with, this is like scenic glue. It's just fancy Elmer's glue, a more expensive version of it, I'm pretty sure. But obviously we're going to be left with some gaps between those. So tear off a little bit of grass from some of the spare pieces and a little bit of sand and rocks. And we'll just fill it in to the point where I don't think we can really see any of the creases anymore. So it was a little bit of a Frankenstein job, but it ended up working out really, really well. Then we will go back to our figures. We will spray them in a TS13 from Tamiya, which is their semi-gloss. And we will start applying some decals, or decals if you're watching from the UK. And this is something that really separates these figures. I mean, if you look at the best figure painters out there, they can, get all these things painted on in a really, really nice way. I would like to think that the majority of us, at least I know myself, wouldn't be capable of painting all of these kind of insignia on all this well. So this is such a nice touch on, Tamiya's been doing it. I know other modern figure releases have done it as well from other manufacturers, but just a really, really nice addition for those of us that don't think they'd be able to do that kind of stuff on their own. Then once that is dry, we're going to spray him, as you see here, in a TS80, which is a matte clear coat from Tamiya. And I think they're turning out pretty well. I do think these are probably the best figures I've been able to do up to this point, which again, probably not saying much, but I was very, very happy with the way they came out. Then we'll come in with a wash, and this is a dark brown. This is an Ammo by Mig wash. Dark brown for green vehicles. You could use a black wash in this case, although I think it would be a little bit aggressive color-wise. I think dark brown really works with their, the German uniform is really a green, kind of an earthy green. And this brown just looks like natural shadows and dirt. So we'll go ahead, we'll give him like a sludge wash, which is essentially just brushing the entire figure, really minus his hands and face. Then we'll come in with a Q-tip, and we want to get this wash off of all the raised pieces. By removing it with the Q-tip, there's no thinner on that, nor is there on this brush. We're also going to give this figure a nice patina, just kind of a dirty look to, that fresh paint. And we'll use the brush to get in some of the, harder to reach areas where we don't want to remove the wash totally, but we want to remove maybe 60% of it so that we're left with more of a shadow effect. Then we'll come in with Tamiya's, this is like their panel line wash, but for skin or flesh tones. This is a really, really good product if you're not comfortable painting faces, which I am not. I've been trying different methods, and I can't really get too much better than this. This product doesn't work that well on a undetailed figure, but the more detail there is in the figure, as you can see, it creates a separation even between his fingers. It ends up just looking really, really nice with honestly minimal effort. Then we're going to do a little bit of dry brushing on his uniform. So a couple drops of white and some field gray, and really just concentrating on these raised pieces of clothing, things like that. I like to do this like a day after the wash has been applied, so the wash isn't totally dry yet. It will, spread the wash a little bit, but what we'll get is really every single version of field gray. We're going to get multiple colors there, which is really what I'm looking to achieve with that method. Then we'll start working on some accessories. Obviously, if you've watched my channel and watched the MG build that I did before, you'll recognize this box. I forget what kit this came with, but there's been, multiple used in multiple different places. And then we're going to attempt to build some barbed wire here. Now, this was done, I did do some YouTube research, and I can't remember, all the different channels that I kind of pieced this together from. I'll have to try to do some research and put it, maybe the link to the original video, something like that, down below. But this is also just using common sense. This is like 0.38 millimeter wire. It's just what I had. But the point is we're going to twist these two together like the fence would originally be twisted. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of super glue pretty much all down this wire. I don't want it to come untangled. I want it to have a nice twisted look to it. And then use whatever length you are comfortable with of wire to basically tie as many knots as you would like around your wire. Once we clip these, that will be the barb itself. Again, self-explanatory. Once you see it, it makes sense. This is more or less how they would make barbed wire. It's pretty close, at least as far as I know. And then we're just going to clip all those off. Now, this is legitimately barbed wire at this point. It will stick to things. Those pieces of metal are sharp. And so don't drop it on your shirt. Be careful not to poke yourself. It is very sharp. Then I have this little barricade set that I found at some point. Tamiya, I think, still makes it. But these are going to be kind of perfect fence posts for our little section of barbed wire that we're going to use. So we'll paint those up in a wood color, kind of off camera. And then we'll do some, wood wash on these as well, just to get that grain effect. Make it look a little bit more convincing. Now, obviously, I'm not painting the bottom of the post here. That's okay. We're going to end up cutting them. I think they were a little too high for my liking anyways. Then we'll come in and I'm going to paint you could easily do this with an airbrush. I think you would have gotten a better result, but we're using Ammo by Mig's Dark Tracks color as the base. And then to get kind of more of a pop of color and just something more interesting going on, I'm going to use AK Interactive's their enamel liquid pigment, which is I think this is the standard or old rust color. It is definitely a little bit aggressive, but it's kind of what, I had in my head, that I wanted the barbed wire to, because it's going to be a really small strand of fence, wanted it to stand out and, bring a little bit of, like I said, extra color to the diorama, vignette, whatever you'd like to call it. So then we'll get those. You could wrap them. I was having trouble wrapping them, but we're just going to super glue them to our makeshift fence posts there. Then I found these from like Master Model. They are miniature MG34/42 rounds. They are so small that I don't think you specifically would need to use the actual, you don't need to match up the round with what you're going for. I think these would pass as any ammunition round. But that's what they look like. Hard to get them on camera perfectly. So we'll take a look at those at the end. And then I did see this, I remember from, this was Boulder Creek Railroad. We're going to make some hay bales here. And I did, look at a couple videos on his channel. He has some pretty good kind of DIY stuff like this. So we're going to take some twine, cut it into, a billion pieces, and make our own miniature hay. We're going to put that on some masking tape, or sorry, Scotch tape, which is going to dry like pretty matte. Well, not dry, but be pretty matte in general. And then we're just going to stick that twine to it and roll it up. Use a little bit of super glue in the end. And we have our hay bale. Once we have that done, we're going to get everything put onto our base here. We'll start with a little bit of super glue on our barbed wire fence. Holding that for a couple seconds, we'll get that in place. And the nice thing about an old barbed wire fence is we don't have to worry if it's perfectly straight, because those fence posts would probably be a little crooked over time anyways. Then we'll get our first figure put into place here. What I don't show, and if you were building these figures, you have to dry fit these. I had to dry fit them 100 times. They go down in a very, very specific way so that this guy can be feeding the ammunition and that this guy can be looking down the sight, but then he also has his hands on kind of the two. One is, I think, part of the sight, like a rangefinder type thing. And then the other is kind of the overall handle of the gun base there. Then we'll get our little box put into place, or crate. I don't know if there's spare ammo in there, but they brought it with them. That was the idea, at least. And we'll get our hay bales also put down with some super glue. I did 3 to kind of give it that, stacked look. I didn't measure if they were going to be in scale necessarily. I just kind of went with what looked good, what looked right. But here you have it. This is the finished base. I will show in a couple minutes here what I was able to do with, 4 different figures from this set, in case you're looking for maybe some inspiration or just what could be done. There's a close-up of the hay bales, and I think that might be the best thing I built on the whole base. So really, really easy method. You see there is a little bit of shine under the heavy light, but with the naked eye, when you're looking at it, there is no shine from that Scotch tape. It is a really, really good method. And something that I haven't really seen hay bales for sale anywhere. So a little bit of twine, tape, and some glue, and you can do the same. And there I've laid down the ammunition, kind of the cartridges that came out of the MG, which is a really subtle touch for how much they were, honestly, but I noticed them, I wanted them, so really a fun touch there. So if you've made it this far, I'd please ask you to, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel. I would say thank you very much for watching as well. We'll obviously be doing many more model builds along the way. We will do kind of sporadic figures like this, although I am running out of figures. I do have from H3 Models, like a Carrington Paratrooper that I'll do at some point. I have the H39s that I am very close to finishing and just need to get the video put together, basically. And then I have a another one of my kind of top 5 for 2025. If you watch that video that I will be doing next, which will coincide very nicely with the release that we will get later this year. Leave you with the figures for a couple more, for another minute or two here, because again, here we have all the different things I was able to do in dioramas / vignettes of all sizes. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video, found it helpful, inspiring, whatever. Let me know what you think in the comments of the finished product, and we'll see you in the next video.